Great, thank you, JJ. All right, well, I'm not going to get on the stage. Hey, first off, let me just take a moment for all of you here, and if this is the first time in the room, just kind of take a look around. Take a look at the architecture, take a look at the lights. This is the Commandant's room. Absolutely fantastic. This building has been here since 1926, and it's been the Marines Memorial since 1946, and we're here today through wildfires, through pandemics, through bank runs, through pretty much every crisis you can probably throw at us, and we're here only because of you all, of the members. So give yourself a round of applause. Thank you for seeing us through COVID, the pandemic. Thanks. Now, I usually take this time, for those of you who see me before Mike Saray gets up here and our guest speaker, Michael Allen, I usually introduce him, but he conveniently ran out of the door. Anybody who knows Michael Allen and knows this place knows that he's the heart and soul of this place. So if you would, give Michael Allen a round of applause. And he's probably just outside listening. He'll probably sneak in now. But seriously, thank you very much for attending. This is absolutely a fantastic night to be here. As JJ said, we couldn't do it without the membership, 501c319. We are the Marines Memorial, but we represent all veteran communities. And our future vision has not only the Marines, and that's why it's great to have a Navy captain here. Brett, it's great to have you here. It's that we're going to have a floor dedicated to the Marine Corps, we're going to have a floor dedicated to the Navy, we're going to have a floor dedicated to the Army, Space Force, Air Force, Korean War, Vietnam, OIF, and OEF. And those floors are going to be dedicated to those services because we are a veterans nonprofit, and we cater to all of them absolutely the same, and it's really a privilege for us to be here. So before I introduce Mike Saray and our guest speaker, let me just say his record, Captain Crozier's record, is absolutely outstanding. The CO, 06 captain, colonel equivalent, the CO of an aircraft carrier is probably, now being a naval aviator, being a co-pilot, I think that's, that's kind of cool. But being the CEO of an aircraft carrier, having 5,000 sailors and some Marines, if you got Marine squadrons on board, 5,000 sailors, you are probably the most single lethal force this nation has. And everything that's going on today around the world, and especially in the Eastern Med, there are 2 aircraft carriers there. And that is absolutely our way of trying to protect certain folks and project power in the world and really keep the peace. It's not about warfighting, it's really about keeping the peace. But when it does get ripped off and you do have to go, you want that aircraft carrier right there, and you want those sailors and those 5,000 and those 100 or so planes on your side, on your back, supporting you. So again, again, you've got my best. He's got a fantastic career. I spoke to him a little bit about, other than despite being a fighter guy, despite being a Naval Academy grad, he's got a great history. Oh, and by the way, he lives in Coronado now. So I asked him when he retired, San Diego, where do they all retire to, all the sailors? Go to Coronado. But Brett, it's actually great, and welcome to the Marines Memorial. And please welcome Mike Saray, our Emmy Award-winning moderator, and Captain Crozier, and please give him a warm Marines Memorial welcome.
Hey, Captain. So, Captain, welcome home. He's talking about Coronado and being a SoCal man. He's a NorCal man, right?
I did. I grew up in Santa Rosa, so not too far away, and still have parents and aunts and uncles and family up there. So that's still kind of home, but we've migrated to where the weather is a little bit sunnier.
So the book is fascinating. First question, are you living up to the title? Are you surfing a lot?
I do. In fact, a couple people asked me that tonight. I do manage to surf. In fact, on the flight up, I was checking the surf report for this weekend, so if I get back in time. I probably surf once or twice a week, but mind you, it's a long board. So the older you get, the longer the board gets.
How long is your board?
It's 9 feet.
9 feet, yeah. That's an old guy's board, right?
It's an old guy's board, yeah.
Great. But, you like to cruise, right?
Seasoned. It's a seasoned surfer's board, not old, seasoned.
Great. I got to admit, being impatient as I am and being kind of a news guy, I wanted to jump through the book and get right to the incident. But I restrained myself because I wanted to see how you were going to structure it all. And it's quite fascinating, because what it does is you bring all your experiences in the Navy, all 30 years, that kind of culminated at that moment. And as we'll soon find out, it wasn't that big of a surprise. You keep referring to all the lessons you learned on the way up, but it's in a very diverse group of characters. Saw the one about smelling the coffee, an Italian lieutenant colonel, Luigi Fazio.
Luigi Fazio, yeah.
What did he teach you about leadership?
Well, it's funny because when I got to Italy, real quick story, I was in Lemoore, California. I commanded a squadron of 12 F-18s, and man, I was going 100 miles an hour all the time. And I got to NATO in Italy, and NATO stands for not another Thursday off, but which is not true. But that was my perception when I got out there, and so I was ready to hit the ground running. I was very focused on the work and the mission, and Luigi was one of the guys that worked for me, Luigi Fazio, and every day at like 9 o'clock he'd come up and he'd say, "Chopper," which is my call sign, because I flew helicopters first and then fighters. And my fighter guys said, "We never want you to forget where you came from." And Luigi would say, "Chopper, let's go get some espresso." And I'd be like, "No, man, Luigi, I have very important stuff to do. I've got to change the font for the Admiral's brief. I've got to make sure that the PowerPoints are squared away." And every day he would ask, and I just kept turning them off. Eventually he said, "Chopper, the reason you should have espresso is because, one, in Naples, Italy, there's no better espresso anywhere in the world." And that's true. And I drink a lot of espresso to this day. He said, "But we want to get to know you. And part of trust as a leader is that we know you and who you are. And we want to spend time with you so we can know you." And so I said, "All right, that's valid." And I made a career of like playing softball with my sailors and finding time to hang out with the squadron mates in foreign ports. But Luigi kind of reminded me that life is about relationships, and to be effective as a leader, you need to know your people. And so I went down and I had espresso with Luigi at 9, and then like at 11, and then like at 2, and it's really good, and it's like a smoke break. Like for those that on the ship, you always have a smoke break. It's like 15 minutes. It's incredible espresso. But what we did is we built some camaraderie there, and this group was like Italians and Germans and French, and we had Turks and we had Brits and we had Marines and Navy. And so that simple act of spending a couple minutes together away from work, talking about football, which is soccer out there, or just life, allowed us to bond. And then funny, March of 2011, when I was out there, 2 big things happened in the world, right? We had the big tsunami in Japan, which we were not involved with, but we also had the Arab uprising, and we had the Arab Spring. And so this Sleepy Hollow NATO kind of not another Thursday off organization got really, really busy. And we went from working like 3 or 4 days a week to like working 7 days a week for about 8 to 9 months straight. And who was with me the entire time was Luigi and all these guys.
And were you still smelling the coffee?
And we still would, now to be fair, we still get espresso, but we were working 24/7 ops. And I remember going, I'm glad I got to spend time with them so that now, because I was in charge of them, I said, now they know me. They know if I'm going to make them work hard, it's not because I'm just being a dictator. It's because they trust me enough to know that it's important work. And we did. And we worked really hard until eventually operations ended in Libya, which is what we were focused on at the time.
In addition to Luigi, I enjoyed the story about the chief you met on a carrier who gave you a real lesson on teamwork.
Yeah, that was Senior Chief Forsman. So math, ready for a quick math lesson for you? And this is how it generally works from a senior enlisted, and Master Guns will attest to this. He came up to me, this senior chief, and he said, I was the XO, so I was the deputy in charge of the 5,000 people on the Ronald Reagan. And he said, "Sir, how much weight do you think a single Clydesdale could pull?"
Any guesses here?
Single Clydesdale
horse. How much weight? Or
like
pull
enough. Yeah, like pull.
A wagon?
Yeah, so it's like 6,000 to 8,000 pounds, and to be fair, like I only knew from like the Budweiser commercial what a Clydesdale was, and he said, so that's pretty good. So 6,000 to 8,000 pounds. So how much can 2 Clydesdales working together pull? And I was a math major, despite the fact that I wrote a book, which is a miracle. But I was a math major, so quickly 8,000 times 2, 16,000. He's like, no. He said 2 Clydesdales working together can pull not 16,000 pounds, but 24,000 pounds. And if they really are well trained together, they can pull 28,000 pounds. And then he just, like a good senior enlisted, he just walked away. Like didn't explain anything, just walked away. I'm like, And so you can get into the engineering of it, right? You can get into the science, and you can talk about friction and static friction and momentum and all that stuff. But the reality is, I think that's true not just with Clydesdales, but with people. When you work together, you are greater than the sum of your parts because you know how to work together. And that resonated not just with the team in Luigi, but my entire career. And in aviation, despite the fact that we have these really cool movies like Top Gun, and it's, you see Tom Cruise as the hero of the day, and he's safe. I can tell you that's not how it really works for those that are aviators. No, you're part of a larger strike package, or you're part of a large, like maybe 20 airplanes at a time that are launching. So you really are just a teammate when it comes down to it. I think that's true in the military. I think it's true in life. I think it's true in your family. And so I think the Clydesdale analogy works in many regards, not just in the military, but in aviation. I knew that I might have been the best dogfighter and bomb dropper, whatever you want to call it, but the reality is you need a team around you to be effective, and that's how we train, that's how we operate, and that's why we're so strong as a military, because that's what we do every day. And I think in life, that's another reminder that life is a team sport, and the more you work as a team, the more you can accomplish.
Now, like any wise officer, the first thing you do when you get a new duty assignment is you go to the chief NCO, and you kind of subtly hint that you really don't know what you're doing and could use some advice.
Yeah.
And tell me about the one you had a line chief in Hawaii that gave you some advice and served you well.
Yeah, so first duty station in Barbers Point, Hawaii. Not a bad place to have your first duty station. We're surfing really took hold for me personally, because unlike Northern California, which is cold and there's big sharks, in Hawaii the water's warm and it's a nice place to surf. But I had a Chief Garcia. My first duty assignment as a young officer, I was given at that point, I knew how to fly a helicopter really well. And I figured that's all I was going to have to do my entire career, is just fly helicopters and be really good at that. And I felt pretty good at it. And then I got assigned a job that had nothing to do with flying helicopters. It had to do with leading people and taking care of people. And so I stepped into my job as a really young ensign, so just a brand new officer in the Corps, in the wardroom. And I was assigned the line division, which is all your junior sailors, right? They're like 18 and 19 years old. And they're assigned there to learn how to refuel the helicopter, clean the helicopter, reservice the hydraulics. They're linemen, and they're very junior. But there's a lot of stuff they're responsible for. And I remember stepping in the job, trying to learn all this stuff, and there's just thousands. Of course, because it's the Navy, we have thousands of manuals and instructions. We had a big inspection coming up. And my chief, my E7, the chief that was in charge, said, "Sir, there's a lot you have to learn. There's a lot of program stuff. There's a lot of technical stuff. But you, as an officer, have three priorities. Your first priority is take care of your sailors. Your second priority is take care of your sailors. And your third priority as an officer in leading people is to take care of your sailors. And if you get those priorities right, you'll be okay."
And you were tested right off the bat. There was a major inspection coming up. It was a Friday. Everybody's running around with their head cut off, and you're thinking about keeping the men over the weekend and instead of surf when you can. And the chief's words kind of hung in there.
No, and it proved out, pretty early on in that assignment. We had a big inspection coming up. And of course, when you have a big inspection coming up, what do? You just work harder and you just work over the weekends. But we were ready, and the chief knew it, and I felt like I kind of knew it, but the pressure was to make everybody work the weekend, which is hard when surf is pretty good in Hawaii all the time. And I remember what chief had told me. So we let the guys have the weekend off. I said, "You guys have worked hard. You're ready to go. I want you to come in Monday, prep for the inspection on Tuesday." And sure enough, that's exactly what they did. They all went and surfed, had fun for the weekend. They came back on Monday, worked really hard, and on Tuesday we crushed the inspection. Absolutely no discrepancies. And so to Chief Garcia's point, I lucked out in that I was given an assignment where I had a senior enlisted, which will prove true throughout your career, that someone that could kind of mentor me. Even though he was junior to me, I knew I had to listen to him, and he mentored me in a way, and that example kind of helped solidify an important point that I carried with me for the rest of my career.
And it's obvious because throughout the book there are these classic examples of where you remember those three cardinal rules about taking care of your men. But you did it in a very creative way. There was one incident where I think it was Thanksgiving weekend, and you made a very tactical course correction with an aircraft carrier to help your men make phone calls home.
Yeah, so one of our big inspections, underway certifications that we do as an aircraft carrier with the entire air wing, all the airplanes, helicopters, all the ships, And that particular day, we had a certain evolution that had to take place off the coast of San Diego. But we figured out we had enough time that we could steam in towards the shore of Coronado, we could set the anchor, drop the hook, and that we would be within cell phone range. And so...
So you take a 1,000-foot ship, 5,000 people, maneuver it back
Totally
to San
safe,
Diego.
totally safe.
And they're all up on the deck making calls on Thanksgiving?
And so, yeah, that's exactly what we did. In fact, I asked the admiral, and he was very supportive. And we did. We went and anchored like 2 miles from the Hotel Del, for those that are familiar. It's deep enough and within cell phone range. And then I remember we set the anchor, and I got on the 1MC, which is our big speaker system across the ship, and said, hey, we're within range. Happy Thanksgiving. You know, for the next 6 hours, we're going to be here. So come use your phone, call home, say hi to your mom and wife, kids, husband, whatever. And they all ran up there. And the south part was, it was a blistering, rainy, windy day, which is unusual in Coronado, but it didn't stop them. They were all out there. And then we made sure we could even relieve the folks who were on watch, so everyone got a chance to call home.
You also make a point that you wanted all of your people to really think about their families. You know, the job was important, but their families were their ultimate career, and their future really depended on that. And you went to great lengths to make sure that your people did stay connected with their families. I think you guys were living in Japan at the time, and there was a high school graduation, and most of the dependents were living in Japan, but you guys were on the boat.
Yeah, I mean, my mantra from day one was focus on being my family, focus on being a fighter, like a helicopter or a fighter pilot, and focus on being a leader. And I would try to convey that to the sailors that I was lucky enough to lead. And so in that particular incident, we were in Japan. There's a high school. It's Kinnick High School there in Yokosuka, Japan. And it happened to be that normally we're underway through the high school graduation, but the schedule changed, and we happened to be close enough that we delayed our underway, which meant that we were going to be there for the high school graduation for the first time in like 10 years. And I had actually an officer, one of my senior officers, came up to me and said, hey, sir, I have a sailor that really wants to get off the ship and stay behind to attend his son's graduation. I said, what? And he came up to me, and the approval chit had been disapproved from like the chief to the junior officer to the department head, all the way up to me, and it's just big red ink, disapproved. I'm like, well, why would we disapprove it? Like, well, sir, this is a very vital sailor to our crew. I said, well, he might be really important. I said, but we have 5,000 people, so we actually have some depth on the bench here. I think we'll be okay if we lose one person. And he said, well, but sir, if you let him go, then there's probably others that have kids graduating high school. I said, that's a great point. Well, let's find out who they are and make sure they can get off the ship as well. And then, of course, he goes, well, my daughter's graduating high school. I said, well, there you go. Do you want to get off for it? So long story short, I was able to kind of turn the tide a little bit, and we let off about 12 people for the high school graduation. And guess what? The ship did okay without the 12 people when we got underway, because we still had 4,988 left to make it work. And they all went out, and they went to the high school graduations of their kids, which is an important moment for any parent. And then they all flew back to the ship on a cod. So they also got a trap, because they got to fly back on the ship on a cod and take a trap. And those are probably some of our hardest working 12 sailors we had for the rest of that cruise, because they were excited they got to be left behind for it.
Captain, how do you strike that balance of being very considerate of the crew, going out of your way to make things happen for them, but not being considered a pushover, and that it's a lax operation? I mean, how do you keep that balance?
Right, it's a fine line, right? Like, I'm a big believer that when in doubt, be kind. Like, be nice to people. And I don't say that like from a position of being soft and weak. In fact, I think kindness comes from a position of power, meaning that if you're strong in who you are and what you do, then you should be able to be kind, and it doesn't mean you're any weaker for it. And I think we should all try to focus on that. Be strong as an individual, be kind to one another, whether it's the military or just day-to-day life. I think that's an important mantra. So as a leader, I think that when you already have a position of power, I mean, when you're a CEO of an aircraft carrier, every time you step on the ship, they ring the bells, they say Theodore Roosevelt arriving, so you can't sneak on and off the ship. And when you leave, they do the same thing. So there's no, so you embody the ship. The ship becomes you, and you have a front place parking spot, you have a nice big cabin, you get to eat whatever you want. So you already have this positional authority, right? It's not leadership. You have positional authority, and the responsibility comes with it. So I always found that when I found the time to be nice, meaning help people out, I wasn't doing it in any way to sacrifice my authority, because you already have that. what you're doing as a human, you're connecting with somebody, and you're finding a way to help them out and make their day better. And as a leader, when I could do that, I tell you what, every single time they came back and they were just better people for it. They were better sailors because they said, some things go, if this captain of the ship can address me one-on-one or can help me out with a problem, this is a ship I want to be part of. This is a culture I want to be part of. This is a team I want to be a member of. And they would do incredible things. So I never felt like when I was kind or helped people out that I was sacrificing anything, certainly never any authority. But I know the benefits far outweighed any of whatever I was giving up to make their day better.
How alien do you think those concepts would have been to the old Navy, the old Corps, dealing with a different generation of sailors and Marines and soldiers? Is this something that you think is a very strategic leadership application for this group that you're working with now?
Well, I think this style of leadership, which is, I don't know how you want to define it, I think it's more important now than it ever has been. I think you can probably go back in history, and maybe we were all less informed, or maybe we just knew to follow orders. Again, there's a clear distinction. When you're in combat, whether I'm flying or driving ships, when you're in combat, there's not a lot of discussion, right? You're not like, you give me an order to do something, I'm not going to go, well, Mike, I don't feel good about that. There's no time for it. And I think in the military, if you train well, you know that to be true. And you know that when it matters, whether it's steaming a ship into combat, going to conflict anywhere in the world, flying a fighter, but that's not what it is normal day to day. It's not what it is peacetime. So I think in today's society, sailors are much more informed. I think society is more informed. I think it has to do with the fact that we have phones and information in a way that we never did growing up. I mean, I got my first phone when I was a lieutenant. Most new sailors that I had probably were almost born with a phone. So, and it's not it can be a distraction, don't get me wrong, but I also think it means they're more informed and more aware. And as a leader, you have to be mindful of who you're trying to lead and inspire. They might just follow your orders, but if you really want to lead them, you need to inspire them. You need to understand them. You need to be mindful of the fact that they have more information now than I ever did when I was an ensign in the Navy. And again, I think that's where we are as a society. So I think as a leader then, regardless if you're in the military or corporate or nonprofit or other places I work now, I'm very mindful of the younger generation that they want to be more informed. And I think leaders then need to communicate more to meet that demand. Whereas maybe 30, 40 years ago, that wasn't as much of a requirement. But I tell you right now, you cannot be effective. And I haven't been effective in the nonprofit world or corporate world unless I'm willing to communicate a lot. And I always say that leaders cannot over-communicate. I mean, you cannot possibly over-communicate. And the joke on the ship would be, I could tell 5,000 people on a ship, hey, we're going to pull into Guam in 2 weeks. And then I'd say it again a week later. And then I'd walk around the deck, the deck plates, and I'd talk to sailors, and I go, hey, you excited to pull into Guam? And they're like, oh, I didn't know we were pulling into Guam. I'm like, we've been talking about it for 2 weeks. So it's kind of like Nike. You just keep saying it over and over again. Eventually it sinks in. I think as leaders, we have to be mindful of that. And we have to understand the generations today, the information that they have, and that there's a demand for it.
And it all came to play in, February 2020, aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt. You have 5,000 people. You hear about this thing called COVID-19, and you're immediately alerted to the dangers of it, but there wasn't much information. What was the first indication you got? What source of information made you most concerned at the get-go?
When they canceled the NBA season.
They canceled the NBA season.
I knew.
You knew it was serious.
I knew it was serious. No, I mean, it was, obviously we're at sea, but an aircraft carrier today at sea has CNN and Fox and all information. You have internet, you have cell phones. You can't communicate with your cell phone, but you have information. So we were following, like the rest of the world, the pandemic as it kind of spread from Asia through Europe. But at the time, it was mostly centered on Asia, and it was actually going mostly westward through Europe, and we were seeing like northern Italy. So we paid attention to it. It didn't mean we knew how to deal with it, and I think we were all kind of thinking this is a lot like, Walking Dead or some TV series, because it just seemed unreal to many people. And then we specifically had a port call in Da Nang, Vietnam, and it was going to be the normalization of economic relations with Vietnam, the 25-year anniversary of that. So it was a very important port call. So we were really...
And there was a lot of pressure to cancel that. I mean, the State Department, or a lot of people thought, well, maybe this wouldn't be safe, but it was a very important diplomatic mission.
Yeah, it was... And I'm mindful of that, right? And as CEO of an aircraft carrier, you have a lot of authority, but you don't get to decide where you pull in or you don't pull in. And so we were watching it. We were concerned, like as you would expect. Vietnam reported 0 cases of COVID at the time, which if you don't test anybody, then you do have 0 cases. And so I took steps to kind of mitigate. Like, we had a lot of interactions supposed to be with the medical department. We were going to bring Vietnamese medical officials on board and vice versa, go into their hospitals. And we canceled a lot of stuff. One of the big things you do on an aircraft carrier is you throw like a big party every time you pull into a foreign port. So we moved the party off the ship to a hotel. So we were doing what we could to mitigate, but we weren't able to turn it off, and so we did pull into Vietnam. But by then, as we were watching the rest of the world deal with the COVID and the pandemic, now we were pretty alert. I mean, now we're really watching it and paying attention. And I should have known, because the next big indication was my wife canceled her trip out to Vietnam, and she's never wanted to cancel a visit. And she's like, I just don't want to be stuck. I said, all right. And that should have been my tip-off right there. Always listen to your wife.
So on that port call, some of your sailors stayed at a hotel, which was later discovered to have 2 or 3 positive cases by some British tourists. So now it's game on. What's the first decision you have to make there?
So first is I have to get the sailors out of the hotel. And the Vietnamese government actually locked down the hotel. They actually blockaded it. And the direction was, leave your sailors in the hotel and set sail the next day. I'm not a history buff, but I just envision leaving 39 sailors back in Vietnam and sail away would never be a good course of action. And I'm sure every Vietnam veteran out there would be frustrated with me for doing that. So we weren't going to do that. And I said, we're not going to leave anyone behind. I had a really anxious NCIS agent that was ready to break in. He had this whole plan of how he was going to break in and sneak them all out. And I'm like, that's not going to be good. That would not. I also don't want to have a gunfight in Da Nang. That would not be a good.
Bad diplomacy.
That would go bad.
Yeah, bad diplomacy.
So long story short, we were able to get them back to the ship, quarantine them, test them regularly. And in fact, after 2 weeks of getting underway from Da Nang, all 39 actually tested negative. So we thought we had dodged a bullet. And we said,
But you were hearing about the Princess cruise ship in Japan. And
Yeah.
from ship captain to ship captain, what were your thoughts there?
Well, I knew the risk bringing them back on board, and I knew the risk if we had any positive cases in a confined area like that. And the Princess cruise ship that was our case study, they obviously had an exponential outbreak. They had, over a dozen people that perished. But remember, on a cruise ship, for those who've taken a cruise recently, you have your own room and your own restroom, your own head, as we call it. For those that have been on a Navy ship, you're sharing. It's by definition, you have one head for every 25 people, so you're sharing everything, and you're in confined quarters. So again, we were able to mitigate. We thought it was these 39 sailors on board that all tested negative. In fact, they had no symptoms. So we felt pretty good about it, and we said, we're really worried about getting on board, but man, we dodged the bullet because we were able to get these 39 on board, really quarantine them. I mean, we fed them with with masks on and gloves, and we, like a shuffleboard stick, we'd serve their food under the door, and after 2 weeks, which is the quarantine period at the time for CDC, they were fine.
But like the rest of the country, you didn't have masks aboard.
No,
you didn't have
masks, yeah.
extensive. The testing, you were limited to what? Only 100, 200 tests a day that you could do?
Yeah.
You have 5,000 people
Well,
on
and
the
most
ship?
of that comes into play later, because after the 2 weeks, again, we all high-fived each other because we thought we escaped, we dodged a bullet, and those 39 had tested negative. And we had about 48 hours until my senior doc called me and said, Captain, we just tested 2 sailors that came down to medical, and they tested positive. And they were not from the 39, and we suspect there's more. And that's when the first time I swore, I said, okay, that's not going to be good. Because now I knew that in that environment, with what we were dealing with, if it wasn't just 2, it was probably like 20, and we knew it was going to spread fast. And for those that have never been an aircraft carrier, I had a medical team of 100. I had senior doctors, I had clinicians on board, I had an epidemiology team that flew on before we ever left Vietnam. So none of these decisions were being made by yours truly, who was a math major. We had a full medical team that was doing the analysis. And we started exactly how we predicted. We started seeing the exponential growth. And so when those guys tested positive, we made a beeline for Guam. And I said, all right, our first thing we need to do is safely get the ship into a U.S. port. We pulled into Ghana Harbor. As we were approaching, we were flying people to the hospital if we needed to. And I knew that once I could get the ship safely pierside, then I could shut down the reactors, and I could, more intently focus on the problem. So it took us a couple days to get there, and then we did. And then, because I knew that, despite having COVID. I knew that running a ship aground or smacking into something would be much worse for everybody. And then we got ourselves to Guam, and then we could focus on the problem.
How focused do you think the chain of command was? What kind of guidance? I mean, it was very confusing being back here in the States. There's a lot of mixed signals coming from CDC, coming from the White House or whatever. Was the same thing happening to you out at sea?
Yeah, we're like the end of the whip, right? So we were getting CDC guidance, we were getting executive branch guidance, we were getting military guidance. It was conflicting at times. And so we were listening to it, and we were trying to follow it. But we also kind of were smart enough, I think, to know that the best thing you can do is quarantine your sailors, get them to spread out, get them some fresh air. Things we know now to be true with COVID. The best thing you can do is get out there, get fresh air, spread out a little bit, not hunker down in 200-man berthing. And so we did exactly what we knew we needed to do as everything else was catching up. And I'm totally mindful that, you know, the world was trying to figure this out, and the military is no different. They're just trying to make the best decisions they can with added things like political pressure and public pressure and international pressure. But we knew what we had to do. We knew we had to first get pierside, and we knew we had to get sailors spread out. But the rub became when I knew the next big steps were going to be, you know, we have to get sailors even further spread apart. You know, we had to get them to hotel rooms or CDC-compliant rooms. And the military at that point had made an unfortunate promise to the governor of Guam to say that we do not need help outside the base of Guam, which was so far from the truth because there was no facilities on the base that were going to meet our requirements.
And that time of year was not really tourist season, so there were rooms available, correct?
Well, there were 10,000 because Guam had shut down all tourism, and that we were also aware of. So they had Guam on a no tourist day has 10,000 hotel rooms, and they had at that point we were far enough along in the pandemic that Guam at that point had stopped all flights coming in with tourists, and most of the world out there particularly had shut down. So we knew we had 10,000 rooms. And we knew we had a bunch of hotels that needed money.
So in your mind, it was a no-brainer. We know what we got to do. There are the rooms available.
Yeah.
And then as you started working that idea up the chain of command, were you getting any input or any other suggestions? Or
Yeah, I mean, other suggestions. You know, there's a lot of deliberation. We love to make, the military likes to make, you know, we call it type 1 versus type 2 decisions. Type 1s you can make really quick. Type 2, you have these long, deliberate process. The military, big organizations love this real deliberate decision-making process, even when you don't need it. In this case, that was to our detriment because it meant that every day we were seeing an exponential growth of positive cases. As we were trying to figure out, do we send the ship back to San Diego? Do we fly the sailors to Japan? Do we run a cruise ship? None of them were bad ideas. It's just that those all were going to take time to execute. And in the deliberation process, we were watching the growth go from 2 to 4 to 16, and we were going to approach close to 2,000. The world numbers at the time were 4% of those that had contracted COVID would die from it, from fatal conditions. 4% is pretty significant. We knew that your average Navy sailor is healthier than your average person. So we said, let's just plan worst case to 1%, which sounds small, right? But 1% of 1,000 is 10 people. I would not feel comfortable as a sea over ship accepting the loss of 10 sailors. That's 10 sailors, 10 families, and I was not going to let that happen.
And at that point, in late March, you had 33 cases, 1,000 people exposed, and it was going exponential on you.
Yeah, I mean, the final number is like 2,200 that tested positive. So that was our 1% we were applying to, and we knew the only way to stop it is to get people spread out.
So, Cap, what happened? So you had the idea, the space was available. Did someone from higher up come back to you and say, no, they're not going to hotels?
We did. I had a small mutiny meeting. I had folks who were ready just to break down the gate and march on Guam and take over hotels. I knew also that would not be a good idea. So I was able to encourage them not to do that. And then we would propose this, we had briefs and meetings a couple times a day to talk about it, which is frustrating, right? As a military guy, as an aviator, I'm always going to bias towards action. I mean, I need to do something. There's something we've got to do. Spending 2 to 3 days to talk about a problem doesn't make the problem any better, and in this case, makes the problem a lot worse. So we would propose, hey, let's use the hotel rooms. Let's spread them out. And it came back to we're looking at it. We're analyzing that. It costs a lot of money. We're looking at sending the ship back to San Diego. We're looking at sending the sailors to Japan. So that's great, but all those are great options. There's only one that's going to solve the problem right now, and there's only one that mitigates the rest of my crew.
So at this point, the Maverick captain has to kick in. What options did you think you had to get the attention of your higher-ups?
Well, so at that point, we had talked about it ad nauseum at all the meetings and briefs, all the way up to the flag level. So I guess in some ways, this is where the Maverick title sticks, is I wrote an email to my chain of command, meaning to admirals that I worked for, guys that I had flown with, guys that I drank beers with, people that knew me by my call sign, and I just said, hey, you know what, let's cut away all the chaff and all the distractions. Let me tell you right now what the problem is. This is what we're seeing. This is the fatality rate. This is what's going to happen if we do not do something. And I wrote it to people that I trusted, meaning that I knew they would take action. They were all aviators, right? And not to mean there's many people that are biased towards action, but I knew them from my aviation career, and I knew they would take action.
But you had a strike admiral.
I do. Yeah.
Living on your ship, just a few feet away.
Yeah. So and he was on board, and he was on the email. But therein lied the dilemma, right? So I crafted this email, and I had inputs from my medical team. I had my entire team look at this email and the case study that we had proposed in the white paper. All these folks wanted to put their names on the same email and the same case study, and I didn't let them do it. I said, as the captain, this is my responsibility. And I didn't want to ask the admiral because I knew that would create a problem, because I knew exactly what he would tell me.
Give you a direct order.
And he would have told me not to send it.
So tactically, you thought, you knew you were going to do an end around, but you never wanted to get yourself in a position where you refused a direct order.
Yeah, and I wanted to give him some plausible deniability, to be honest, to be able to say, Chopper didn't show it to me and sent it, because I was mindful of the impact to him as well. Even though he was part of the process and part of the deliberation process, and I could have used his support earlier in this, I also knew he was in a tough spot, and I knew I wanted to accelerate it, and I knew the best way to do that without me just disobeying a direct order was to include him on the email, but not ask for permission.
So the email gets leaked to the San Francisco Chronicle, which had to be the first and only scoop they've had in 20 years. And all hell breaks loose. And the first question comes up, someone said, why didn't you put it through classified email channels?
Well, but real quick, I want to give Navy credit. When it first came out, even before it leaked, the Navy said, you know what, the captain did exactly what we wanted. He presented the problem, he presented solutions, and we're going to give him the help he needs. And that was true. Don't get me wrong, I had a phone call or two from admirals that yelled at me. But I also had admirals that said, hey, we're going to give you the help you need. You sent off a red flare, you asked for help, we're going to give you the help you need, Chopper. And then I still got my ass chewed, but that's okay. I knew that was coming no matter what. And then it leaked. And then now it went from this internal discussion, debate, and it became a public, national, and maybe in some cases international discussion about what is going on, what is the U.S. military doing to help solve this problem.
So couldn't you mitigate that by using the classified channels?
And that was the question, was why did you send it that way? All medical stuff up to that time had been done on the unclassified. So all information we'd sent all the way to the executive branch, you name it, DOD, because the medical community operates on the unclassified network. So all our reporting, all our testing was done on the unclassified network. And it was important for me to make sure we could continue to have the medical team as part of that discussion. So sending it, one, there was nothing unclassified about the email to begin with, but two, it had to be something that could be shared within the medical community, because they are the ones that had to bring in the support, and the teams that had to come in to help take care of the sailors. So I deliberately chose that. Again, but there was nothing unclassified. And remember, we're pierside in Guam. Every sailor has a cell phone. So anything happening was already kind of information that was out there. Every time we had a positive case, those numbers weren't a secret. The sailors knew that, and they were on their phones on the flight deck calling home. So in addition to the pressure I felt on the ship, I had 5,000 families that were reaching out trying to figure out what's going on, because they were being informed by their families. So there was really, again, nothing classified about it. There was nothing secret about it. You can't pull an aircraft carrier in anywhere without the world knowing about it. The concern was that by sending in the unclassified channels, that it made it easier to leak, which is valid, because it did. It leaked and it got the Chronicle.
The fact that you were getting some buy-in and some support from senior flag officers, did that make you even more surprised when all of a sudden the tide turned on you?
No, I think when it went public, and then I knew it became a public and a political issue, then I knew I no longer had any control over it. and it would be interesting to see how it played out. Whether I didn't necessarily feel like the tide was turning. I just knew that within the confines of the DoD, that I had lost control of it, meaning that the decision was going to be made outside the ranks of the military on how they were going to handle that case. And ultimately, that's what happened.
And was the Navy feeling that they were being embarrassed, that it was obvious that they hadn't come up with a good course of action, and that somebody was stepping out of line and making things happen?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. I mean, I think that was not only the military, but I think the executive branch felt embarrassed as well. And they would much rather would have had me conform and follow a procedure and just do what I was told to do, which I generally am very much a conformist. I made a career of just following orders and doing what I was supposed to do. But as you get more senior and you're responsible for people, you realize it's more important than just taking care of people than just conforming. But I think the military is, and I believe this to this day, is a learning organization. So despite any embarrassment or frustration, I knew the military would take steps to adjust course to get us the help we needed. And then as we move forward in the future, they would make sure it never happened again. So I didn't, whether they're embarrassed or not, I'm a true believer that the military is a learning organization. You have to be successful in combat. We are in aviation by trade. Every flight you do, you talk about for hours after just to make sure you can improve upon it. And I knew the military would adjust course and they would learn from it. So I felt, despite any embarrassment, the military would learn from it and we'd all be better for it in the end.
The strike admiral who was on your ship, who you kind of went around, he was not on that mailing list.
No, he was.
He was on the mailing
was,
list.
yeah.
Okay, he did get the mail. And what was his first reaction when you met him after he saw that note?
Yeah, because he came right down to my office and said, "Why'd you send it?"
And
he was surprised that we had like 5 or 6 other people in my office with me, all the other senior commanders on the ship. In fact, he asked them, he said, "Why are you guys here?" And one of the guys flippantly said, "Because we wanted to see you come down here and what you were going to say, sir." So that was the CAG.
And you were also promised to have some communications all the way to SecNav Modley and Secretary of Defense Esper at the time. What kind of communications did you have with them?
Yeah, so it was a weird environment because I think once we pulled Pierce side, everybody was trying to solve this problem. And I mean this today, everyone really wanted to solve the problem. So the Chief of Staff for the Acting Secretary of the Navy called me trying to figure out what they could do to help. I was supposed to have a call with the Secretary of Defense that was canceled after the email had leaked. So there was a lot of just weird indirect communication directly with me, which enabled me to say, we need CDC compliant rooms. We need to get the sailors off the ship. Clearly I wasn't doing it well enough, or also the fact that just because the captain of the ship, at that point I was jumping all kinds of chain of command, right? I was going around not just my admiral, but like 10 other admirals. So I was always very mindful of the fact that when I'm talking to the Secretary of Defense level of authority that, hey, here's what's going on, here's the problem. I'll be honest, I was hopeful that we were going to solve this within the confines of the military, so I probably wasn't as forthcoming with the Secretary of the Navy at the time or the Secretary of Defense. But it was also an awkward situation when I had to tell my admiral that the Secretary of the Navy just called my cell phone that I answered when I was asleep because it was 2 in the morning. But so there was a lot of communication. It just wasn't. It was still. It was actually preventing progress because there were so many indirect avenues trying to solve the problem. But I think it all stems because people wanted to solve the problem. Everybody wanted what was best for my sailors, but no one wanted it more than I did.
And how surprised were you when you got the phone call that you were being relieved?
Well, I think once it leaked, that was the joke, right? I said, well, they're going to fire me now, and then CAG said, no, they can't fire you now. They'd be stupid to fire you, Chopper. And then they did fire me. But I was okay with it, meaning that I knew that was a risk. I knew when I sent the email, I was going to rock the boat, to use a military term. I knew that I was unlikely to make the next step up and become a flag officer. I was okay with that. And I knew that on the spectrum of things that might happen, I could be fired. I was hopeful that it wouldn't because I loved the job. I mean, there's no better job in the world than to command an aircraft carrier where you can fly a helicopter in the morning, fighter in the afternoon, and then drive the ship around the South China Sea chasing around Chinese destroyers. And I didn't want that. I would have done it for the next 30 years if I could. But I knew that I knew it was something I was willing to risk to do what it was right by the sailors. So I didn't have the 10 that died or whatever. It didn't matter. Even 1 was unacceptable. So when it came to fruition and the Secretary of the Navy, the acting secretary, made a decision, the admiral called me down and said, hey, Chopper, the acting Secretary of Navy, just called and has said, you've been relieved of command.
At that point, you go back to the ship, pack up your things, and thought you could make kind of a, not a hasty exit, but
Sneak out a little bit?
yeah, you did the lower deck.
Yeah.
Didn't use the term when you go through all the bells and such. And then there was a surprise that greeted you on your departure.
Yeah, it took me all day to like pack up, and then I remember the officer of the deck came to me and said, "Sir, we're going to open up the officer brow. We're going to man the watch, and you can exit from the officer brow." Because at that point it was like 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night, and I said, "Well, let's not put sailors back on a watch to have me go off the officer brow. That's unnecessary. I'll just go off the enlisted brow, and we'll be good with it." Now remember, I'm no longer the captain of the ship. I'm on the ship, so I'm not going to get the bells. I'm not going to get the send-off. So I'm just ready to sneak off the ship. And so we came down and stepped into the hangar bay, and there were a few thousand sailors there that surprised me.
Not only a few thousand sailors, I think a lot of people saw the news clips. Thousands of cheering sailors.
Yeah.
And what struck me about the image was very spontaneous. It was very spontaneous, very heartfelt, as that whole group with the colored jerseys and whatever started moving. That was not a military formation.
No.
That was just a human display of emotion. How'd that strike you?
Yeah, a lot going through my mind at that point. Really the gravity of the situation. Like up to that point, I was very focused on packing up and turning over all the responsibilities of the ship to my XOs. So all day I've been working and kind of put it out of my mind that I'd just been fired, I guess. And so stepping in the hangar, was the first time really that it all came down and like, holy cow, this is not the gravity of the situation, but this is how significant this is you are leaving the ship for the last time, and your sailors are here to remind you. And I saw it as two things, right? Like one, the adage of there's never die on a sword, that you don't have to, or live to fight another day. And here I am leaving the ship at this monumental moment when they still have to fight and deal with COVID. And I still felt pretty bad about it. I mean, at that point I felt bad, like I'm leaving these guys behind, right? I knew they were in good hands. There was a lot of great leaders left on the ship. My XO was a phenomenal guy, but I felt bad about it. So I personally took that as some way to say, hey, these guys are going to fight on. These guys and gals are strong. We've trained them well. They're going to do great stuff, and they're going to go on and fight another day. And I think they were also recognizing the sacrifice that, ended up costing me my job, and they wanted to make sure I got an appropriate send-off. So, so it was a lot as I walked off the ship for the last time.
Did you have the confidence, though, that inner peace within yourself that you had done the right thing? And maybe flashing back to Chief Garcia back in Hawaii, he said, take care of your people. I mean, and the reason why, I said I'm glad I didn't jump ahead in the book. I wanted to read those other stories because it seemed very methodical what you were doing. There didn't seem to be any equivocation or self-doubt.
Yeah.
Because this was something that was deeply instilled in you.
I mean, nothing's black and white, particularly as a leader with all that going on. However, I felt comfortable. I mean, I knew that was a possibility, and I felt comfortable with that potential outcome, even before I got to the point for asking for help. So when I was leaving the ship, I wasn't second guessing that what I did. I was just more recognizing that I'm not going to be able to continue to lead this incredible group, and it didn't make me second guess what I did. It just made me understand the sacrifice or the impact to me personally. And I hadn't really thought about it up until that moment. But no, I mean, I'm often asked, knowing what you did at the time, would you do it again? Yeah, I would. I'd like to think I would, because I did it for the reason that Chief Garcia taught me back in Hawaii, right? As a leader, your priorities are to take care of your people. CEOs of an organization or CEOs of a ship, you're never the smartest person in the room, but ideally you bring the right people together, you take care of them, you inspire them, and then you build that teamwork, and they go on and do great things. And that comes down to priorities as a leader. For me, it was take care of my people, and that's, in the end, I guess I look back glad that I did what I always said I was going to do and prioritize my people.
One thing that was not reported in the press, at least I didn't pick up on it, was you mentioned that you were getting a lot of indications that you're going to be reinstated, that a lot of the admirals were saying, well, this is going to blow over, we've done there'll be an investigation, whatever, but you're going to get your job back.
Yeah, so I left the ship. I had tested positive leaving the ship, unfortunately, and then I had a room, a Navy lodge room. My neighbor was an admiral in Guam. They're a really good guy. He used to sneak me Big Macs when I was in quarantine, and bourbon occasionally, and I could actually see the ship from my window. So I sat there for 30 days in quarantine trying to get healthy, and I'd see the ship from across the bay. It was a weird sensation. But the Secretary of the Navy came out to visit the ship, and unfortunately...
That's a pretty famous video, too.
Yeah, unfortunately, he took it upon himself to go off script and berate the crew and myself over the 1MC, the speaker system. Ironically, that also leaked to the press. And by the time he landed back in Washington, D.C., he had resigned or been fired. Before he left to fly back, he stopped by to visit me, and we actually had a heart-to-heart conversation there in Guam.
But a much different conversation than what he had with the sailors.
Yeah, I didn't realize he had just berated me publicly. So it was actually a very civil conversation. I could sense the stress on him, the outside political pressure that was probably influencing his decisions. But it was very much a cordial conversation, except he seemed very stressed out.
And he lost his job as well.
And he lost his job. So after that took place, so once he resigned or lost his job, the Navy did then make steps to reinstate me. So I was on the phone with the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, and I had a public affairs officer sign. We were drafting letters, and I was told, hey, we've decided to reinstate you. We think the decision to remove you was made in haste. We're going to put you back in office as the CEO of the ship. First time it's ever happened in the history of the Navy. We're going to put you back in command. Start thinking about what you're going to do.
But and their cover was, the subsequent investigation was that they were already going to the Navy was already going to get these hotel rooms for you. So
right, yeah. So quickly they didn't put me back in state. They didn't reinstate me. Obviously, they decided to do a second investigation, which is okay. But at that point, obviously, I knew I've been in the military long enough to know when if you don't like the results of the first investigation, you do another one, and so they did a second investigation, and there was certainly ample room at that point, 3 months later, to find criticism with things and decisions we made, and that's ultimately when they said is, you know what. There's enough stuff that wasn't done correctly that doesn't make sense to reinstate him at this point. And I would argue at that point, I mean, I'll be honest, after the initial attempt to reinstate me wasn't executed, I knew I wasn't going to be reinstated. I mean, I was hopeful, and it would have been really hard on the crew for me to come back on the ship 4 months later, which is what would have happened if they were going to reinstate me. And so I'll be honest, if I was the CNO of the Navy at that point, I would have thought long and hard whether it made sense for the crew and the ship and the mission to reinstate a CEO who now has been in the public sphere for 4 months, if that was really what was best for the Navy. And I totally understand why, at that point, it didn't make any sense.
So you go back to San Diego, they give you, what do you call a goat herding job? What kind of job?
Shepherd? No.
What's that term you used?
Cat herding job?
Cat herding, goat herding, cat herding.
Yeah.
So, and the next time you saw the Roosevelt, where were you and what were you doing?
So I was out paddleboarding, and my buddy and I, we paddleboarded about a mile up to go to San Diego as the TR was coming back. And gorgeous day, which usually is in San Diego. And the ship steamed back into the San Diego harbor. All the sailors had manned the rails, and they all had masks on, of course, because it was still the height of the pandemic. And he and I they probably didn't see us, but we weren't too far away from the ship as it came into San Diego Bay to see him come back, which is all I ever wanted.
Surf when you can.
And surf when you can, yeah.
And now you've gotten out of the Navy, dabbled a little bit about being an airline pilot and whatever, but it seemed like what you really landed on was service again and working with veterans down in San Diego with Veterans Village. Do you think it's in your DNA and all the training and all the experiences, the command experiences you had in the military, that you still were most passionate about serving?
Yeah, it's definitely the thing I have found to be most rewarding since I retired. And I worked there I'm now on a board, but I was working day to day as the CEO of Veterans Village of San Diego, focused on homeless veterans in San Diego, of which there's almost 1,000 down there. They too have a homeless problem in San Diego. But it was a little bit of sense of service. You know, it's hard when you're in the military moving around all the time to find a place to volunteer and pitch in. But now that I have some roots in San Diego, and I like taking care of people, and I like working in an organization. I certainly have found that to be the most satisfying thing I've done since I've retired, and a way to continue to serve, I guess, and deal and help veterans and help people that need help. I no longer do that exclusively, but I think that there's probably many people here that volunteer, and you all know how rewarding that can be, and how important it is in today's society with complex problems like homelessness or inequality stuff. I mean, you know, I couldn't do that very often throughout my career. I moved 20 times in 30 years, and I would try to do like Habitat for Humanity when I could. But now I recognize it's really important to me, now that we're calling San Diego home, to find a way to give back. And I'm assuming many of you here do. If you don't, I encourage you to volunteer in a way that you can, because it is very rewarding work, and for me, it's a way to continue to serve.
So Captain Crozier, thank you for your service. And I think for all of us, thank you for the lessons, leadership and employment. I think we have a few questions.
We've got a few questions lined up.
Captain Crozier, when was the time when you felt most alone in being in command or making a command decision, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, you have incredible staff with you when you're a senior leader in the military. If I ever felt alone in a decision, then I knew that I probably wasn't asking for help at the right level. You know, your senior enlisted on aircraft carrier is an E9, and arguably one of your more experienced leaders on board the ship. You have your XO. So I'll be honest, if I ever felt alone, the only time I ever felt truly alone making a decision was when I was in a cockpit by myself, and I had to decide how to safely get the ship back or make a decision in combat. But as a leader, like when you're on the ship or you're on deck somewhere, if I felt like I was alone, I reminded myself I probably wasn't asking for help or asking for people to help out. And not that I needed their opinions, but I always knew that I would feel better about my decision if I brought them in. So I basically, in a way, saying I don't know that I ever felt alone in a big decision.
And Brett, in the crisis that you faced, did you feel alone with the rest of your staff?
No, and it kind of goes back to even when I sent the email and I was asking for help, I had my staff around me helping advise me. I had my family back home. Not that I asked Mary about how to deal with COVID, but I knew I had support back home. So I feel blessed in that way that I never really felt alone in those big moments.
Thank you, sir. So you are a self-proclaimed maverick. How do you coach and train officers to constructively be a maverick, and do you think it can be taken too far?
Yeah, it definitely can be taken too far. In aviation, right, we say it's better to beg for forgiveness than ask permission. So I think it's in an aviator DNA, we're always a little bit of a maverick in that regards. There's a risk, right? If you're a maverick, whether it's business or in the military, if you're making decisions that are not conforming to the norm as they were, it could lead to detrimental consequences. So I wouldn't say that you willingly make maverick decisions all the time. There's oftentimes, if you're making a decision that doesn't seem to be in line with everybody else, you should be asking yourself, why is that? And you should go back to the previous question. You should be trying, bouncing it off other people, try to get other people's inputs. But there might be times when you feel strongly enough, and it matters enough to you, that even though you're not going to conform, you're willing to make the sacrifice and make a decision that might not conform with the norm.
Thank you. Did you lose, or how many sailors did you lose from the pandemic? And did that have an impact on your timelines for making decisions?
So we lost Chief Thacker, unfortunately, and he passed after I left the ship, but he was one of the ones that contracted COVID initially. We had about 12 to 15 that had to be intubated that had serious complications from it, but by then we'd had the help that came in, the medical help from the Marines and the MEV and stuff, and the hospital there in Guam. So we only lost Chief Thacker, which alone is enough to make a difference. But that was actually after we had sounded the alarm, I guess. It doesn't make me sleep any easier when I think about it, but certainly that was always what we're trying to prevent, and more.
Thank you. And the last question. Where was BUMED and the Navy Surgeon General? Why didn't the Navy Med/BUMED take front and center stage against senior Navy leadership to support you?
That's a great
Your
question.
thoughts?
That's a great question. I think they too were tied up in this very deliberate decision-making process, and they were advising vice, trying to, provide guidance or making their own decisions. So they definitely were involved, meaning that we had BUMED on conversations and meetings with us as we were deliberating how to best deal with it. But they weren't taking a lead role in that. I think they were defaulting to the operational decisions, which we're not making. So I know they were involved. I know they've taken a lot of steps since then. We benefited from the team that they had sent out even before we got to Vietnam, the epidemiology team that helped out. But they weren't they weren't as active as I would have liked to have been. But by then it didn't matter. I mean, it was pretty clear what we needed to do, and how we were going to mitigate it. And I was okay at that point making a decision, even without BUMED being part of it.
But it's pretty evident even back here that the Surgeon General and the head of the CDC and everyone was really challenged with trying to figure out a course of action.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of political
I mean,
pressure.
the whole world, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I remember I got back to San Diego after flying through Honolulu and LA, and there's no one in those airports, which is a surreal feeling. And then the news of the day in San Diego was one surfer was out there surfing at PB, and like the cops were trying to corral him because how dare he be out there and surf during the pandemic? Because that's where we were as society. We were watching it like it was a white Bronco speeding through the freeway, and I don't know if he got arrested, but I look back on it. We were all trying to figure it out, right? And we've all have learned a lot about ourselves, about the pandemic, about society and government, and so I don't think it was any different at the time for anybody in the military. I mean, we're just a part of society in that regards. And now we know you can surf during a pandemic, I hope. That's my lesson. You can surf.
Well, thanks again. And I think everyone will enjoy the book. And don't skip ahead to the Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Read the book. It's a really wonderful lesson. Great people and great experiences. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation from Marines Memorial Association and Foundation. To learn more about the organization and our programs, please visit our website at marinesmemorial.org.